Welcome into Discern. Today is Wednesday, December 22nd, just a few days away from Christmas. I am Ross, and I'm joined by Mark Turman, who's filling in for Jim. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Ross. Good to see you, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas back at you. We're almost to the holiday. So covering various stories over these few weeks leading up to the holiday. Something that hit the news feed that we wanted to highlight today from pop star Billie Eilish. And so I actually want to read the article, which addresses pornography, and then have a chat about kind of the accessibility of that and really how this speaks into our culture and some interesting things that tie to some of conversations from prior weeks. So this article is from the New York Post. Billie Eilish says porn, quote, destroyed my brain after she began watching graphic online movies while she was still in elementary school. The singing sensation, who's now 19, made the shocking confession during the Howard Stern show on Monday. As a woman, I think porn is a disgrace, Eilish declared in the interview. I used to watch a lot of porn, to be honest. I feel incredibly devastated that I was exposed to so much porn. And the article goes on to say that Eilish also admitted that she began watching more and more graphic types of pornography, which warped her ideas about sex and relationships. So, Mark, this is a critical conversation in our culture right now. What I really appreciate so much about Billie Eilish is that she's willing to speak on this, and especially being part of an industry that, if you kind of just look back at the music industry for 100 years, and it seems like more and more, they're really kind of glorifying, normalizing sex and a lot of what the music industry is doing. But she's in that industry, and she's, speaking out against, hey, this had a really bad influence on me, and certainly at a younger age. What stands out to you about this headline?
Yeah, several things do, Ross. I think it's a critically important topic, obviously, and something that Christians have spoken to in many different ways for the last 2,000 years, if not longer. Oftentimes in the last 50, 100 years, Christians have been highly criticized for their views on sexuality when the Bible and everything that it says to us says that God is the one who created our sexuality, and God has a great and beautiful plan for it, and that we need to learn from Him what His plan, design, and purpose for sexuality was all about. That God is in every way pro-sex as long as it's within the boundaries of a covenant relationship between one man and one woman that He designed, and that believers feel called in that relationship as part of God's will for their life. What really stands out also about this article to me is that somebody like Billie Eilish, who I know a little bit about, but not a lot about, but who has become a very prominent figure in the music culture and in our country, in the parts of Europe as well, over the last particularly 5 years, 7 Grammy Awards and many other accolades that have come her way. She has really captured the imagination of a lot of people, but for her to speak in this way really reveals something about where our culture is, as we've talked about here, as a post-truth and a post-biblical morality culture, that now, if we were to assume that Billie Eilish is not focused as a devoted Christ follower, don't know if she is or not, but let's just assume that she's not. She's speaking about the emptiness of broken sexuality that is revealed in the porn industry, and how even without referencing things that we would talk about from the Bible and from God's design, she is indicating the emptiness that she has experienced personally because of what the world has shown her, what the world has taught her about sexuality that is very destructive rather than beautiful as God intended it.
Yeah, you speak of that emptiness, and we know so much of sin is trying to fill that Christ-shaped hole that we've talked about before of, I have this need, and so I'm going to find it in these various vices. And the real problem with pornography that's changed even since I was a kid is just the pure accessibility and the ways that it pervades even innocent things. And a super simple example is even in a phone where you're just browsing what apps to install. Well, there's opportunities for these companies to promote their graphic material before I even get to choosing to get it, and it's something that I've even seen that my kids have run into, and I'm like, gosh, I thought I gated every possible, and there's certainly a separate conversation we could have about how to gate, when to gate, and how to restrict this access. But the pure accessibility of it is making it just more and more of a problem. And so I am super appreciative that Billie Eilish would take this opportunity to use her platform to identify, hey, this has not been good for me, and it's a real problem in society.
Right, and I think that's a very, very important point from this article. If you read all the way to the end of the article, it talks about several people in the mental health field who are trying to help people who have been damaged by things just exactly like what Billie Eilish is talking about, and about the destructive impact of porn, especially upon children. And that really is what's changed. Accessibility and availability is what's changed, particularly over the last 30 years with the advent of the internet. I believe that it was pornography that was the first and is still the most profitable industry that is using the World Wide Web as a means of distribution. And that didn't used to be the case. It used to be difficult to get access to porn. It used to be limited to magazines. It used to be limited to adult purchases. But all of that has in many ways been taken away and has really made our children vulnerable, as Eilish's testimony reveals. And that's something that we need to be aware of and that we need to be intentional about, because the Bible says that the devil wants to steal, kill, and destroy everything that is of God, and that includes human sexuality, and it includes children. And as her testimony revealed, I think she is exactly on when she says that it killed her brain, that it really damaged her understanding of what sexuality is supposed to be. And she may be working through that for the rest of her life in some ways. Moving to a place as individuals, as families, and hopefully eventually as a culture to realize the damaging effects of pornography and helping our world to see a better way through biblical morality is where we need to go, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think a critical step really for us to identify here, to point out, is you've really got to name what this is. And it really, the concept of pornography can start with just literally one image. It's sort of a unique sin pathway that it literally could start with one image, and then it can quickly spiral. And that image can be presented to your child in a completely innocent way, meaning the platform wasn't even necessarily intended to be used for that, but there it is. And so it can lead to more and more, and it's a spiraling kind of pattern that I've seen unfortunately play out. And there's a reason that in student ministry, this is always a prominent topic, but it's so hard to bring up because it can feel taboo. It can feel like an area you're not supposed to talk too much about. Whereas instead, it's like, no, I think we need to go. This is a significant issue. It's a real issue. It's even worse than it was because of the accessibility. So to kind of wrap this episode, Mark, and we've hit some of this in prior weeks, can you outline a few just practical steps you've seen as a pastor to help us guard and protect against this sin?
Yeah, I really think there's two rails that we need to think about. One is as it relates to technology, as you talked about in terms of accessibility, that parents need to be particularly intentional about building healthy parameters for their family around technology and accessibility. About when do you give your child a phone, and when you give them a phone, what capabilities does that phone or that computer have? Many families have learned the wisdom of keeping all of the family's technology in common spaces so that there's an accountability to each other, and that includes mom and dad, that they model this because they can be victimized by the addictive tendencies and temptations of technology. And so it starts with mom and dad, and it starts with becoming wise about how to manage technology. That's one aspect, especially around the accessibility. I think the other thing is about parents becoming much more intentional and comfortable in raising their family in an awareness of sexual health and what sexuality is all about. I think probably the greatest need among the church right now is a comprehensive biblical plan for teaching our children God's design for sexuality from their earliest days. We can gripe and complain all that we want about how public schools may be offering sex education, those kinds of things, but the church needs to step up and come up with a really good way of equipping parents. And there are some new resources out there. There's some great things that people can use to start teaching their children. It needs to be supported, reinforced, and helped by the local church, but it also needs to be the church equipping parents to then equip their children with a biblical, healthy perspective on God's design for human sexuality in an age-appropriate way.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to land this episode too, with just some practical thoughts there. And one thing that I think to add to or to build on what you said is, kids are absolutely going to learn what's true about sexuality through some source, and if they don't get it from a parent, they're going to get it from somewhere else. Especially now, we talked about accessibility, so to be able to speak into that directly and to speak biblical truth into the model that God created for sex and what is sexual health, is be able to lean into that. And as you say, at an early age, because they're getting it at an early age in school. So great practical tips. This will be a conversation again that we'll be dealing with in future episodes. I'm glad we're getting to cover it here on Discern, and I'm really thankful that Billie Eilish has kind of brought this to the forefront. So that will wrap today's episode. Thanks again for your time, Mark.
You bet. Glad to be a part of the conversation.
And we'll see everybody back here tomorrow, just 2 days before Christmas, on Discern.